Time to pull up a chair. We've got another great story for you today in the rLounge. My husband, 31 male, and I, 31 male, have known our friend Dylan, 32 male, since grade school. Dylan was in our wedding party. He was one of my husband's groomsmen. We've been so close. He's like a brother to us. Dylan was one of the most intelligent, down-to-earth, adventurous people we knew. He studied hard in school to become an engineer, and he worked hard at that for a number of years. He even went to Everest and climbed to base camp. He started up an app, and it got really big and popular, and ended up selling it and making a ton of money. He's traveled the world. Anyways, you get it. He's done really well for himself, and he's been a good friend to my husband and I. Back in 2020, when COVID was really bad and running rampant, Dylan ended up getting laid off. He still had quite a bit of money, so he wasn't really worried about it, but he spent a lot of time alone. Like a lot. And my husband and I really think that that time alone got to him. Within the year, he became really against COVID restrictions. He'd fight the system. He refused to get his vaccinations and bought into all the conspiracy theories. And because he didn't get his vaccinations, he couldn't find a job that would accept him. Because at the time, a lot of jobs were requiring you to be vaccinated. On top of that, we had our first baby, and we weren't being super strict on visitations, but we preferred people to be vaccinated. So because he wasn't vaccinated, he didn't get to see our firstborn for about a year or so. But during that time, Dylan ended up telling us some wild stories about his life and what was happening. He kept telling us that he could hear this drilling sound in his apartment. He looked all over his apartment for what was causing the sound. He said it drove him nuts when he was trying to sleep because that's when it was the loudest. He said the drilling wasn't all of the time, but usually at strange hours of the night. He finally discovered the location of the noise, and it was right underneath his bed. Then he ended up hearing banging, and the floor was vibrating. He tells us that the women who lived below him were trying to drill their way up into his apartment through the floor. Then somehow he came to the conclusion that this person was trying to kill him. From there it really escalated, but at the time, we fully believed him. We didn't think anything was wrong with him because he even had video evidence of this drilling sound. Later it turns out that this person underneath him was just doing some renovations at weird hours of the day because they were a nurse and they worked strange hours. Anyways, he tells us that the apartment he lives in is actually used for trafficking, and he was making a bunch of allegations about the apartment building owner, and then somehow he dragged his dad into it. Yes, this all seems far-fetched, but at the time, we fully believed him and supported him. I mean, Dylan was terrified. He would come over to our house and he'd cry in my arms. Before this, I had never seen him cry or show emotion like that. He had always had his head on his shoulders. Well, once he dragged his dad into it, he texted us one day and said that he was getting committed and he didn't know when he'd be out. Yes, committed as in one flew over the cuckoo's nest. Straitjacket, padded walls, yeah. But he had this explanation for it. He said that he had found out information on this apartment owner and how it connected to his father, and that now these people were trying to silence him, and it was a whole big thing and so much bigger than what we understood. He said he didn't want to tell us too much because it would drag us into it, and he didn't want to endanger us. But when he got out, we allowed him over to tell this story. But he made us power down all of our electronics. Well, at this point, my husband and I are kind of like, not sure how we feel about this, but we don't want to just not be there for him because he's our best friend and we care for him. We want to be able to support him. And parts of his story are still making sense. He's connecting the dots. He's like these people threw me in the loony bin to shut me up. They gave me some pills to make me lose my mind. And now at the time, my husband and I were like, wow, yes, we've seen the movies. This checks out. This makes sense. But then we asked ourselves, well, why? Why is Dylan so important? Why would they care about Dylan? He's just one guy. We are sure people who are into dark things, like whatever Dylan was tapping in to deal with little guys all the time and can just brush them off. And then we thought, well, yeah, what better way to deal with the little guy than to make them seem like they're crazy, isolate them, and have them doubt themselves. So time goes on, and Dylan ends up selling his apartment and getting out of the building because he believed people in the building were trying to kill him. He goes to live with his aunt, who is the only person in his family who was talking to him at the time because he's accused his dad of some pretty heavy crap. And at the time, he gets committed another 2 times. He's in the mental health facility for 30 plus days at a time. After a while at his aunt's, he then somehow brings up how his aunt is feeding information to these people who are trying to silence him and kill him. But he doesn't blame her because he said she's probably doing it because they control the money she's getting for her long-term disability. Okay, we guess that could check out. But now my husband and I are sort of like, perhaps there's something wrong with Dylan. Don't ask us why it took us this long to kind of reach this conclusion, but we really wanted to support and believe him. So my husband and I switched gears and just wanted to listen to him. We were like, okay, He just needs someone to talk to. So we'll just listen. But clearly there's something going on with Dylan. So now we're in 2023, March. Dylan comes over to our place to see our second born. He actually looks good. He starts to look healthy and more like himself. Before this, he was on some medication that made him gain some weight, which was also unlike him. But medication can't be helped with that sometimes. Medication can be bad for making people gain weight, especially meds that are supposed to help with your mental health. I was on antidepressants a few years back and it made me gain weight like mad, so I went off of them. Now, I will say that between 2020 and December of 2022, Dylan was looking rough. I mean, he'd come over to our place and he'd look like all sketched out and his lips and eyes would be twitching, and he just looked like he was on the brink of crying and being emotional all the time. This was unusual for us to see. Dylan was always the strong guy in our friendship. He'd always be the guy you'd go to who would have all of the answers. So it was odd being on the other side of this. Anyways, he breaks it to us that his sister died of an overdose and he thinks that she was given something that was laced with something. And in the same conversation, he spills the beans that his sister was schizophrenic. Bingo. There it is. My husband and I's light bulb goes off and we sort of glance at each other and suddenly it all makes sense. Then he says that he's moving about 12 hours away to the coast. He said he has to get away from here because he's being watched. He said that he can hear a woman on his phone trying to talk to him when he's talking to someone else. He said he can hear the same woman on the radio when he's driving around listening to music. Then he tells us that there's an older woman at this bar across the street from his aunt's, and these people who were trying to kill him hired her to act as a bartender to drug him and listen to him ranting at the bar. He said she asked him a bunch of questions that suggest she knows what the answers are, but she's just testing him to make sure that he doesn't say anything he shouldn't. My husband and I just sort of nod along with this. So then he tells us that he's moving away to live in this trailer park and live the rest of his days with peace and quiet on the coast. He said he has enough money to live humbly. So we're both like, wow, good for you, man. Get away from all this BS. Then he's on the coast for a few months and he calls my husband and he's crying and he's saying that he tried to get a little job at this laundromat just for something to do. But the guy at the laundromat was talking to him and he knew too much about Dylan. Dylan was crying on the phone and he said that this TV crew is also trying to film him and they installed cameras in his car and outside his trailer. So my husband is trying to calm him down and he's just listening to him at this point. And Dylan's like, I can't trust anyone. This is my reality. And I can hear this going on and it all just solidifies exactly what we've been thinking and our hunches. Surely Dylan has schizophrenia too. I mean, a camera crew? Dylan, honey, you need help. Then he ends up getting kicked out of his trailer park for starting a fight with some other resident and he's forced to come back. But he doesn't have a place to live. So he shacks up in some hotel. But he's not telling us where. He also asked to come over for coffee a few times, but we both said we were busy and that it wasn't a good time with a new baby. And he told us that on his drive back, a camera crew in their cars followed him all the way back. And they ended up staying in the same hotel as him, and they snuck cameras into his room. Well, at this point, we're debating telling his parents because we're not sure if they even know how bad it's getting. We don't hear from him for the longest time. We reach out to him. No answer. We call and leave messages. No answer. So we start to get a little worried until one day we get a group message. But in the group message, Dylan says, "Back off, CIA scumbags. Should never have trusted you." And so my husband and I kind of look at each other like, did he just call us members of the CIA? And then he blasts us on social media and calls us CIA and says that we can't be trusted. And we get people messaging us like, is Dylan okay? And we're like, do we tell them what's been going on? And so we choose not to tell them because we didn't want to slander his name, but we basically said that he's going through some stuff. He's just still stressed about his sister's passing. People bought it, but we sadly ended up having to block him on social media. He was just saying some ruthless stuff about us and literally calling us the CIA, and that we were feeding them information about him. Why? I don't know. I don't know what information we would have had on him that we could possibly give to the CIA. And if even we were the CIA, we wouldn't be living in our 3-bedroom little single family home. I tell you that much. So then a few weeks after that, we get another message sent from him to the same group chat. This time, he says that if we don't back off, he's going to get our kids taken away. Well, that was that. My husband basically responded and said, "We love you, Dylan, but you need help. Please don't text or call us again." Then Dylan sends another text and he says, "Watch your backs." And after that, we take screenshots and block him on everything. I then call the police and I tell them what happened. They tell us we did everything right, and if we want, we can file something that would get him committed again because we have reason to believe that he needs some help mentally and needs to speak to someone to get better. So I go down to the courthouse to get that figured out. But right as I come back, I pull up to our house and I see Dylan at the front door with a hammer in his hand. He starts running up to my SUV and he's screaming at me. My babies are in the car. And he's like, "You fed them everything. I told you everything and I trusted you and you gave them all of the insider information." Then he goes on about how he's on a game show and he's the best contestant they've had yet. And he's really going to give them a show. And he starts hitting my SUV with a hammer. I'm trying to dial the police and back up at the same time, but he's just following me out of the driveway. Both of my babies are screaming their heads off at this point. I'm shaking and crying and trying to tell the cops where I live and what's going on. Within minutes, they show up and have poor Dylan at gunpoint, and he's dropped to the grass, and he's laying there while they're putting handcuffs on him. The hammer is on the ground. My windshield is all smashed up, and the hood of my SUV is destroyed. I call my husband and I tell him what happened. He's literally livid and says not to go anywhere and that he's coming home ASAP. While they're taking Dylan away and putting him into the back of the car, he's screaming at nothing, and he's saying, "Are you not entertained? I want my bonus. I want my bonus." And I'm sitting in the SUV trying to soothe my babies. But I'm also bawling at this point, wondering how the heck some guy like Dylan just got to this point, and how our mental health facilities fail people like this by not giving them the proper help and aid and offer services that help them get better. And it just ends up putting not only them, but other people in danger. The cops asked me if I want to press charges, and I said yes. It killed me to say yes, but I did. That night, I end up calling his mom and she answers, and we tell her everything that's happened. Like, lay it on her. And she tells me that I'm not the only one to call her and tell her this. She said that unfortunately, her and Dylan's dad have done all they can do, and it's really out of their hands. She said that the facilities just don't hold him long enough and don't seem to be helping. She said it can take years for them to figure out the proper medication, and then that only works if he chooses to take the medication, which he hasn't. She just kept apologizing and she feels so bad, and she said that we should get a restraining order and stay clear of him. She said that we did our best, and he's so lucky to have friends like us who listen and support him. And she starts crying and telling me that she's lost not only her daughter, but her son, and it's been so hard. I just feel terrible. Mental health is no joke. We ended up getting a restraining order, and we haven't heard from Dylan since. I mean, that could also be because he's currently committed or something, but yeah, I still feel scared. Whenever the doorbell rings, I'm scared that it's him. We invested in some more cameras and a heavier duty security system. It's hard. We feel sad, angry, and all the emotions. He's just not someone we recognize anymore. We miss the old Dylan. We wish there was more we could do, but we have to prioritize the safety of our own family. He's not our responsibility. Seriously, it's like Dylan went from most likely to succeed to most likely to star on a conspiracy theory podcast. From climbing mountains to climbing the walls of paranoia, he really went off the deep end. I mean, I've heard of midlife crises, but this guy took it to a whole new level. And those paranoid delusions? It's like he's auditioning for a role in The Truman Show reboot, but forgot the cameras are for reality TV, not his personal surveillance. But in all seriousness, seeing someone you've known for years, someone who once was full of life and promise, spiral into a world of mistrust and paranoia is like watching a once bright star flicker and fade into darkness. It's a stark reminder that the thin line between sanity and chaos and how easily it can be crossed. The most challenging part is the helplessness you feel, knowing that despite your best efforts to support and understand, there's a little you can do to alleviate their suffering. Despite your best intentions, you're left standing on the sidelines, watching as your friend's reality crumbles around them, unable to intervene in a meaningful way. It's a heavy burden to bear, carrying the weight of their struggles on your shoulders while also grappling with your own feelings of sadness, frustration, and even guilt. You find yourself haunted by questions of whether you could have done more, whether you missed warning signs, whether you somehow failed them as a friend. In the end, all you can do is offer your love, your sympathy, and your unwavering support, even from a distance. What do you think? What would you have done? Thank you for joining us today in the rLounge. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. See you soon.